Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And continuing on a little bit from what we teased at the end of last episode, I have now seen Detective Pikachu, as have we both. And so this seemed a good time to talk about the nature of video game movie adaptations.
Yeah, I think that, well, for one, the revelation about Detective Pikachu is that it's actually a good video game movie. It's based on a actual video game, Detective Pikachu. The stories diverge a bit, and it's based on a franchise in video games, although the franchise is everywhere besides video games as well. But yeah, it's interesting. And so for right up front, we're going to go into spoiler territory for Detective Pikachu. So if you don't care about spoilers, great. If you do, I wouldn't listen to this episode, and we'll forgive you. Come back in 2 weeks. But otherwise, it's one of those things that, because I can't discuss the bad without spoiling it, because my largest gripe with the movie has to do with the main villain, which is revealed through spoilers. So anyway, if you tuned in and wanted to hear Detective Pikachu, was hoping for spoiler-free, sorry. If you want a spoiler-free snippet, you can go to Real Movie News and Reviews, their episode on Detective Pikachu. They do have a non-spoilery short part before getting into spoilers, so you could check that out. But yeah, so Detective Pikachu is one of those movies where I think the first thing for me that makes it work really well, beyond the story, beyond the comedy, beyond any of that, is that the Pokemon look real. They look like they exist in the space. They look like you could reach out and cuddle them. And I don't think I've ever seen special effects that good when it came to anything related to fantasy properties or things from my childhood.
Yeah, certainly something as ubiquitous as the Pokemon series. And we run in, well, especially because we run into, as the series goes on, the graphics get more and more realistic. But Pokemon has always been sort of a handheld series. So even as the graphics have gotten good for the Game Boy Advance, for the 3DS, there's still nothing that even closely resembles an attempt at reality. So this feels like the biggest stab at it, and it's so refreshing that you know it's not real, but it does a good job of existing amongst real actors. It's a Who Framed Roger Rabbit kind of situation.
Yeah, and it's also one of those things where, like, I never look at them and get a sense of being taken out of the movie. There's only one moment where it feels like the Pokemon have no weight, and it's when Pikachu has been hurt and Justice is carrying him. Tim is carrying him, and that looks weightless because Tim is probably carrying a, green sack or something, to superimpose Pikachu there. But beyond that, when they're walking in space, or like even when they're riding in the backseat of the car, Psyduck and Pikachu, and talking to each other, like it looks like they're there. My favorite scene probably with two Pokemon and their owner interacting is when Ken Watanabe is interacting with his Snubbull, because it's just so precious, to see one of the greatest character actors and actors, Ken Watanabe, interacting in a Pokemon movie in general. But the fact that his Pokemon is a Snubbull is just perfect.
They treat it with appropriate gravitas.
Yes, for sure.
It's so good.
I guess first let's talk a little bit about what we loved in the movie as a whole. We can talk about what we didn't like, and then I think go into why it makes for a good video game movie. And so for me, as far as the story and the writing and the acting, all of that I thought was really great. I thought the comedy was really funny. There wasn't really that much cringeworthy stuff, and I just thought it was well presented, well written. The characters had depth. The plot was bonkers, but it was a Pokemon movie, so I care very little about how crazy the plot gets because it's a Pokemon movie.
Yes. When you start from 10-year-old stops terrorist organization, you have no leg to stand on as far as sensible plots go.
Yeah.
And it's very funny that this is a very strong adaptation of the Detective Pikachu 3DS game. I imagine a lot of moviegoers that are seeing Detective Pikachu, it's just a generalized Pokemon movie.
Right.
Whereas it's not quite a one-to-one, but it is a very close adaptation of the 3DS game, which is sort of a, not quite point and click, but like Telltale style adventure game of solving mysteries and interviewing and choices made that actually did not do that well.
Yeah.
Certainly in terms of a Pokemon game.
Yeah.
It did well in terms of a game in general, but like its general Metacritic score is about 71%. I remember reading a lot of lukewarm reviews to it. And so it's very funny that this is kind of a weird Ouroboros situation of Pokemon is a very successful franchise, but Detective Pikachu was not a very successful game in comparison, but it's a much better film adaptation of a not as well-loved video game, where normally it's the other way around.
Right. I've said in the past on this show, I love the Wolverine Origins video game on the Xbox 360, but the movie was crap.
Right.
And what's interesting about this is with Detective Pikachu. So, like, my experience with Detective Pikachu, the game, is through The Completionist. He did an episode on it and talks about how the story was fun, but was fairly straightforward, and then the gameplay was fairly boring. And so I think it's really interesting that those bones made for a good movie. But I think also the difference, and what's funny is also Gerard makes a prediction based on the game story, because they don't tell you on who Detective Pikachu is, that comes to fruition in the movie. He's like, this could be a spoiler, I don't know, but I think that Detective Pikachu is actually Tim's dad. And then in the movie, it turns out to be exactly that, which I think is really funny that he was able to predict that just by playing the game, because the story was fairly straightforward in the game.
Feels like one of those setups, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting. One thing I liked about the movie was how, in a world of over 700 Pokemon, and a world where we sit there and think about the implications of the powers of a lot of these Pokemon. Like, how does Alakazam not take over everybody? How is every Hypno not on a watch list? Mostly psychic Pokemon. These are things I worry about. But they did, with a nice little slice of the Pokedex, showed you Squirtle's working with firefighters, showed you the far-reaching implications of Psyduck's explosive headaches. It showed bits and pieces to give you a good feel of a living, breathing world without feeling like they had to cram as many Pokemon as possible in there. And it was a nice smattering of original 151 and newer ones as well. Like, you could have just easily had Mankeys attack Tim, but it was Apomps.
Well, yeah, like my favorite moment when it comes to integrating them into the real world, which never occurred to me as a diehard fan of Pokemon and a DJ in actual life, is the underground Pokemon battle scene. The DJs are being supported by boomboxing Loudred that are just beatboxing.
Loudred or it was Loudred, not Explode. That's right.
Yeah, and they were beatboxing, and I was like, that makes perfect sense. Of course they beatbox. You know, like in modern hip hop, they would be used for that skill with their giant mouths and their speaker ears. And I thought that was so brilliant. I was like, oh, I want one for my parties.
Yeah. It's a beautiful little integration, and from the beginning when they go, Rhyme City is different than other cities. We have Pokemon as on equal footing with their people. No Pokeballs, it's just Rhyme City. You're like, okay, cool. That feels like the kind of shit that happens when you go into a city of tomorrow that's inevitably going to go wrong. Perfect, good.
Right, this can't possibly go wrong at all.
This can't possibly go wrong at all, and also does a nice job of setting everything up, and so for a series that has been around for over 20 years, where we can all sit here and nitpick our 10-year-old selves and all of the ideas that were so cool when we were 12 and now are like, well, that seems kind of dangerous or weird or dumb. It cuts off some of that so-called biting commentary that isn't.
Well, yeah, that whole opening scene where Tim and his best friend, whose name I forget, and the actor's name I forget, but he's also in, he's the cab driver in Deadpool, he's great, and I'm so glad that he had a small little cameo in this movie. They try and catch a Cubone in life, and like, they show, I think what makes this world feel real is that opening moment. They start with like, you love catching Pokemon in these games, but if you were actually those people, here are some real dangers you might face. And the fact that this tiny Cubone is so terrifying because it can do so much damage was so well shown and like conveyed through that attempt to catch it. Like it was just really, really well staged.
It's why Professor Oak stops you when you first go into the grass. It is dangerous to go after these Pokemon without a Pokemon of your own.
Yeah.
Look at what could happen.
Yeah, and that
to an adult.
Yeah, and it goes catastrophically wrong. And I think it really sets the tone, like, because that doesn't exist in the game. That moment doesn't happen. But I think it was a brilliant way for the writers to set the tone for, like, hey, this isn't just a normal Pokemon movie. It's a little different. But this is what it's like to try and catch a Pokemon without one of your own.
It gives you a nice little microcosm. The bit on its own before the main plot kicks in that fills out the world very nicely. I really enjoyed that.
I think that's the biggest problem a lot of video game movies have is like they kind of just throw you into the adventure. There's no real layout of the world, of why these characters are here, why things are happening. They kind of rush you into it.
And they try to link too many references to things within the games into the plot rather than just sometimes having a moment on its own.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that can happen in a video game. There's the potential for certain items. There's the potential for certain locales or inevitability of some of them. And so trying to make reference to all of them or trying to integrate all of them ham-handedly, it just comes off awkward.
Yeah.
And speaking of, I don't know, trying to fit elements or trying to make something work, I really liked the Kitty's first noir movie feel of this movie.
Yeah, totally. Especially the first half, because the second half, I mean, it's still noir, but like the first half when Tim and Pikachu first meet and like Tim is wandering, like the aesthetic is very noir. Like the way it's shot, you know, Tim's interactions with the police chief before he meets Detective Pikachu.
The bad guy bar.
The bad guy bar. The coffee, the scene at like the diner getting coffee, you know, the interactions with the reporter. A lot of that feels like a very light touched noir movie. Like it's not super heavy handed. It's just like it can be followed, but if you're a fan of noir, you can see the beats and you can see the moments that mirror a good noir movie.
Yeah, and some of the characters and some of the people are trying to lean into being in that genre harder. Like the character of Lucy is absolutely, she's trying really hard to be the hard-biting reporter and asking the hard questions. And it comes off as just like, you are trying way too hard. And it's supposed to.
Right, of course. Yeah, or like any of the scenes where the Detective Pikachu is trying to work through the case. Like Tim goes to bed and wakes up and the apartment is covered in coffee cups, newspaper clippings, and thread running between push pins. And it's just like, because that's the cliche, right? The crazy detective trying to figure out the conspiracy. And it's like, yeah. And like, I want to talk a little bit about Ryan Reynolds' depiction of Pikachu. Like, I mean, we're all Ryan Reynolds fans here, I feel like, at this point, especially with his miracle work as Deadpool. And just the way he approaches comedy and marketing and how he's brilliantly like woven himself into these things. He feels like this character. Like there's never a moment where I'm going, oh, that's just his voice. He does such a good job of the delivery and the sincerity that like even when Tim is arguing with him about his addiction to caffeine, like you're just here for it. You're like, this is adorable. I mean, one of my favorite scenes in the movie was spoiled in the trailer, but I love when he's like, can you hear him? He's talking. He's like, yeah, of course he's talking. Pika, Pika, you're adorable. And he just goes back, you're adorable. Like, it's just so well delivered. And I do like that we get sprinkling of the original actress as Pikachu in there for when other people hear just Pikachu.
Right.
Which is always fun.
It's also a nice piece of grounding of the franchise.
Right.
You're like, no, this is still like official-ish. You know, we have Pikachu is voiced by Pikachu here, and Ryan Reynolds is just here to be a character.
Yep, a version of this character that will be explained towards the end of the movie.
Right.
I do like how the plot progresses. I do enjoy, like, I love the twist with Mewtwo that he's depicted as a villain in the beginning of the movie because that's the thing that shows that they were considering the original Pokemon fans, kids like you and I who grew up playing it, because in all of the earlier media, he is often depicted as a villain because he's mistreated and all of that, but he often does act like a villain. And to have that twist where actually he's really trying to protect Detective Pikachu and Tim was a really cool twist.
Yeah, and it also is reminiscent of those of us who grew up with Pokemon also watched the first Pokemon movie.
Right.
So when it's like 20 years ago, Mewtwo was created, we could all sit there and go, yeah, he was. And as well as remembering the events of that movie and being like, well, yeah, of course he's terrorizing humanity. That's what he does.
Right. That's also, they terrorized him. Like,
well, yeah, he's justified. He's absolutely justified. But it's still just like, yeah, this is, when you put Mewtwo in a movie, this is what you're doing.
Because at the end of the day, humans are terrible. And we know that. We suck. And I'm kind of okay with it the way it's depicted in the Pokemon movies. Because,
Agreed.
It's this idea that we're, the debate about we're encasing small creatures in tiny balls. It's essentially a sort of like people fight that's an allegory for slavery and they're not unjustified. But like the idea is that these wild Pokemon who are caught are treated better than the wild Pokemon. Like it's a whole thing. And we're not going to get into it. But there's definitely threads of that there, which is why I think the focus on Rhyme City made so much more sense to start, because it's a place where that argument at least doesn't have to happen yet. Because in that city, the Pokemon live free. They partner with people, but they're not living in balls. They're not used for battling, except in the underground battle scene, And so it kind of allows you to go, oh, well, this is like a utopian Pokemon society.
Yeah, if they tried to make a movie where, hi, I'm a trainer and I'm going out and catching Pokemon and making them fight other Pokemon and taking down something big with that, that would feel a lot more awkward and poorly adapted, whereas this was sort of okay, a lot of people have a Pokemon and that makes sense, and they're not in a ball, and most of these people aren't using them for battle. People are just people going about their lives, and their partners are a part of that. You trying to make the Ash Ketchum live-action movie would bomb horribly.
Yeah, I mean, I think that thing is still coming, although the rumors are that it's actually going to be based on Red and the original Pokemon game, which is sort of an analog for Ash anyway. There are similarities. But I've heard that that's like they want to build out a Pokemon cinematic universe. And honestly, there's so much stuff and people in Pokemon that you could easily do that.
Yeah.
I just want, if they get to the Alolan region, that they cast our good friend Abe Goldfarb, who's the voice of the Pokemon professor in the cartoon, in the live action version, because he'd kill it. I'm just going to say that out loud.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
But yeah, and I think that at the end of the day, whether they build out a cinematic universe or not, the reason this world feels so lived in is because they thought ahead, like what Pokemon would be great in these jobs, like how can we get some comedy out of this? How can we make the world feel lived in?
Well, that's something that Pokemon as a franchise has succeeded at in terms of, okay, they have the mainline games. The two versions, they come out, gotta catch them all. But there's also mystery dungeon games, dungeon crawlers as Pokemon. There are several grades and shades of puzzle games. There are other kinds of like arcadey kind of things. It has been adapted into a lot of different realms, even straight up with the Detective Pikachu game that's more of a narrative style game than even the RPGs are, the mainline RPGs, that Pokemon has already set itself up as this big living, breathing world, as it were. And I think its greater successes is when you adapt a, I guess, side story. Something like Detective Pikachu, where it's like this little enclosed thing and not meant to go to all of these locations. You don't adapt an 80-hour RPG into a 2-hour movie. But you can adapt a story that exists within that world. And if you have moments and pieces and ideas that reference those other bigger things, I feel like that's going to play out a lot better, especially in something like Pokemon, where there are over 700 Pokemon at the moment and more are coming, that if you pick a team for your main character to have, you're going to run into a lot of people being upset about that. There's some strong meta on Pokemon, very strong. And so having the, like, okay, this guy's got a Pikachu, and everyone can kind of go, okay, well, everyone knows Pikachu, fine. If you're going to pick one, make it be Pikachu, that's cool. But if you're like, all right, this trainer doing their adventure, and they pick this one and this one, picking, your RSTLNE of your Pokemon team, I feel like you're going to run into some issues with pushback. Oddly
Well,
enough.
because also when it comes to video games, you can customize your own experience. It's why I cringe every time they say they want to make a Mass Effect movie. It's like
Exactly.
Mass Effect has so many branching paths, and you can customize that experience to yourself so much. The movie version's not going to have that feeling.
Right.
Also, like the live action movie would not cast Jennifer Hale or Mark Meer, and so it wouldn't like everyone would rebel anyway.
It wouldn't feel right.
Whereas something like this, again, most fans of the diehard RPGs were probably only peripherally aware of Detective Pikachu and knew the bare bones of it. And so there's less risk there. And also, yeah, adapting the anime would also not make a lot of sense because also you're not going to have the voice actors play the characters in real life for a variety of reasons. The biggest one being none of them are children.
Right.
But it also, like, again, which is why I think, like, I'm conflicted. Like, bringing Ash Ketchum to the big screen might be better because everyone's experience of Ash is the same because it's the cartoon. Whereas Red, in the original Pokemon game, like, you, again, can customize the Pokemon you catch, the experience you have, the town you go to, you know, the paths you take, and you're just going to have some semblance of disconnect there.
Right.
And I think following these smaller stories, you're right, make a lot more sense. And why maybe dipping into parts of the anime might work for them, and why actually dipping into stories of the more recent animes might be better, because at least for me, as a lifelong Pokemon fan, I've barely kept up with all the games and have still missed some of the generations and have not kept up with the anime at all. I think the last time I watched it, I watched bits and pieces of the black and white version of Pokemon, the anime, and I haven't watched any of the newest one in the Alolan region. And it's not because I don't want to or I don't like it. It's just there's so much of it. You know, it's been around so long.
Right. And so why not just, rather than pull any one particular thing, or maybe pull a particular thing and not try to take it all in a very small amount of time. I think something that would be a lot of fun in film adaptations of Pokemon stories from here on is have Red be a character. Some of my favorite moments in the Pokemon games since Red and Blue have been those moments when you run into Red.
Yeah.
Like at the top of Mount Silver and Gold and Silver. That was definitely a big moment for a lot of us as kids.
I'd say so.
As well as when you run into him in the Alolan region in Sun and Moon. It's like, yeah, these stories continue on and there's connections to stuff, and just because we're not controlling them anymore doesn't mean they're not still out there, I guess, or there's not that doesn't discount the possibility that they can't show up again. So you can have those, you know, Red is either, I wouldn't have him be a celebrity or anything, but have him be one of those sort of people who recognize who he is.
Yeah.
And wherever you want to put that in the story, fantastic. And then we can go from there. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that also possibly focusing on some of the secondary characters from the anime might be fun. Like maybe the story of Professor Oak, how he became a Pokemon professor. Start with him as like a younger man and becoming the Pokemon professor. Or focusing on one of the gym leaders and how they rose the ranks and became a gym leader. Like, I think those kinds of stories are more isolated and can be more interesting. And then they could lead into bigger stories. Because the reason that the Avengers works for the most part is because they did that. They focused on individual stories and then built them to lead into each other.
They did the legwork, yeah. Honestly, it'd be kind of fun to do some of the non-battling kind of adaptations.
Yeah.
You know, Pokemon Ranger, Pokemon Snap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't literally have a movie where it's a guy riding in a weird on a little train car, but, you know, rather than capturing the Pokemon, getting their imagery, seeing them, the idea of Pokemon photojournalism. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I think it is.
It would be fun to see those takes on it for sure. I think this is a good point in our discussion to talk about some of the bad things about the new movie and then talk about video game movies more generally. So for me, the biggest issue with this movie was the ableism in it. The fact that the main villain, that you find out about halfway through the picture, played by Bill Nighy, because it's Bill Nighy, so of course he's going to be the bad guy. Like, on a meta level, we all knew that.
I was hoping to be wrong.
Right. But he's essentially a villain because he lost the use of his legs due to a mysterious illness that's never explained. And his whole motive is, I'm less than in a wheelchair. I want to be supreme. I want to be Mewtwo. And it just sucks because if you're someone in a wheelchair, you take that messaging as, oh, I guess I'm not good enough because I'm in a wheelchair. Like if they had explained what the disease did, how his legs were ruined, that the disease affected his mind, like anything, or that he's been wanting to catch Mewtwo since before he was wheelchair bound. Like if any of those things were in the movie, it would have immediately deflated that issue. But the fact that it wasn't, that his driving force was that I'm stuck in a wheelchair and I don't want to be, makes it really shitty. And so
if they even gave it a little more motivation in terms of why does he resent being in the wheelchair? Like if there was a certain amount of, I can no longer do this one particular thing, which is still not quite great, but at least they're giving a nod to, it's not just he's less than because.
Yeah.
It's why does he see himself as less than because?
Right. And I mean, it's
where's his myopic view coming from?
Right. And it's a tired trope. Like that trope has been in movies for ages. And, you know, I have a lot of friends who are in wheelchairs and who absolutely wrote off the movie after seeing that. And I get it. It sucks. You know, you and I have the privilege of being able to look at that and go, oh, that sucks, but I can still enjoy the movie. I totally get other people who don't.
Yeah.
But like, if they had just given him some semblance of more motivation beyond that, because I get why they did it. And as far as the overarching story, for those keeping track, like at the end of the day, Bill Nye's character wants to merge humans with Pokemon to become the ultimate life forms. And he wants to merge with Mewtwo, which he does, his mind anyway, and use this ability that Mewtwo has to put the spirit of people in Pokemon. And again, it's such a bonkers plot device, and I thought it was great for the movie. I just wish it was executed better, because everything else about the movie I really loved. It's just, it's hard not to see that and go, that could have been better, but we're here now.
There's at least a dozen other kind of justifications you could give a character for wanting to do that. You could just as easily have it be a rich guy who wants more power, and money can't buy him everything, but it can buy him research so he can become an even more powerful version of himself.
Yeah. It's literally that one thing that kind of spoils that whole plot thread.
Yeah. In a movie that on a lot of other steps did a really nice job of doing broad strokes to bring everybody in, and everyone brings their experience and idea to, oh yeah, that works because of this. That one was rather tone deaf.
I will say though about the final scenes, one of my favorite moment in the final scenes is revealing that his assistant was a Ditto all along, and that when she takes off her glasses and has those beady little eyes, and then that whole shape-shifting fight scene was a brilliant use of Ditto that would have never even occurred to me, even a little bit.
Oh, and when I went to see the movie with a bunch of friends, when they showed after the interview scene early on in the movie, when he gets wheeled off by his assistant, who is a Ditto, it's such a quick blink and you'll miss it moment.
Yeah.
And we even kind of had oh, that's cool. Ditto can turn into people. Huh. And then an hour later, it's like, oh, yeah, Ditto can turn into people. Shit.
Yeah, it's really a really good payoff. Like, I've only seen the movie once, and I do want to see it again to catch that kind of stuff. But I think at the end of the day, what makes this function as a great video game movie is that the video game part of it is not the priority. Like,
right.
Making it feel like a video game isn't a priority. I think what I mean, there are a million reasons why the Super Mario Brothers movie doesn't work. And if you want to hear us talk about that more, you can go to the Another Past podcast episode where me and Geoff were guests talking about it with Case. But like, one of the big problems is that they tried to force things from the game into the movie in strange and bizarre ways.
Yes.
And like, I don't think the story was ever the priority. It was, let's throw in shit about Mario Brothers, and then we'll write a story around it. Whereas Detective Pikachu at least feels like we have this story from this game. If we were to try and put it in a movie, how could we flesh it out? How can we take that and turn it into something new?
It's telling a story with reverence, or not reverence. Like, the Mario Brothers movie feels more like it's trying to make a movie despite its video game trappings.
Right.
Whereas the Detective Pikachu movie is a little more of, let's tell a story. And then build the video game parts into it, build the world as part of it. We'll tell it's to go back to MCU for a moment. They're not. We're making a superhero movie. It's Winter Soldiers. We're making an action political-ish thriller that happens to have Captain America leading it.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the biggest problem with a lot of the video game movies. Like, for example, the Tomb Raider movies. I haven't seen the newest one, though I heard it wasn't very good. But I saw both of the ones with Angelina Jolie. And while I didn't hate them, they weren't great movies. And I think the problem is Lara Croft as a character is not someone that you really identify with, not in those movies at least. And the story was okay. It felt like a lower quality Indiana Jones, because what makes Indiana Jones great is not the action, it's the stuff between the action. And Tomb Raider didn't really get that. They understood it as, let's just throw a lot of cool action that Angelina Jolie can handle, and make her a badass, which is important too. But the narrative threads between didn't really work, and it ends up falling flat as a result. It's definitely not the worst video game movie, but I think, and probably what failed the newest one too, is they're basing it on the new Square Enix game, which shows Lara coming into her own. But again, if you're just trying to mimic the beats from the game, you're going to lose any sense of originality or progression. You have to make it your own, because that was a 60-hour video game and you're trying to condense it into a 2-hour movie, and it's just not going to work in the same way.
Yeah, trying to adapt levels and stages from a game into scenes and action pieces for a movie is a very precarious tightrope. If you only go from scene to scene, level to level, it's going to get tiresome. It's going to get very, very tiresome. If you are using the setting to further inform what the story is, you kind of need to go, how much of the gameplay style exists here and how much of it should be, you can hit start to skip cutscenes in a video game, but the movie is the cutscene.
Yeah, I mean, it's my biggest hesitance when they talk about doing an Uncharted movie, which I get why they want to, and I like the character of Nathan Drake, and it feels like a younger man's Indiana Jones, and they want to create a franchise, and I get it. But the problem is that Nolan North's portrayal of that character in those games is so well done, and those games are created to mimic Indiana Jones films, that to come back around the other way just feels like a waste of time. Like, if you want to engage in those stories, watch the cutscenes on YouTube, because the gameplay moments are a lot of fun and I love doing them, but they don't convey a ton of story. The story is delivered in the cutscenes, and it's just done so masterfully that to bring it back around and try and make a movie out of it, I just think is going to fail.
Right. It's why I never, ever, ever want to see a Metal Gear Solid movie.
No. Well, because also they're never going to hire David Hayter to do the voice, to play the character, who could easily do it in real life. He doesn't look unlike Snake.
He's a little older now, but he still can do it. But it's also the idea that you can, on some of the releases of the games, watch an entire editing together of all of the cutscenes, and it actually works as an extra long movie.
Yeah.
Because what intrigues you as a gamer, as someone inhabiting this avatar and doing these actions, it hits different notes and it does different things than getting to watch them be cool. And there's certain aspects of, I don't need to see this part of being cool, I want to do that. And others where it's I don't want to, and vice versa.
Right. Well, I think also one of the failings, as we've talked in the past about adapting from a movie back to a video game, is video games are all about the mechanics and the action set pieces. For the most part, there are tons of narrative-driven games and walking sims that aren't that. But for the most part, when you think superheroes, you think of the fighting and the action. And the reason the direct adaptations don't work is because they spend so much time focusing on the action or mechanics that there's not much outside of it. It's why games like Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, which is coming out soon, that I'm very excited for, and those games in the past have worked, is because they focus on the combat and the multiplayer and build a story around it that's wholly unique to make those mechanics make sense. They're not trying to shoehorn in something else. Now, we could see something revolutionary in adaptation because Square Enix is working on an Avengers game that, from the look of the artwork, at least from the logo and stuff, is going to be based on the cinematic universe and not the comic books. And so I'm curious to see how that works, because they've said there's co-op, they said there's customization of your heroes, But they haven't shown anything yet. They won't until E3. And so I'm curious what that means. But I mean, Square Enix has done some great things with other franchises. So I'm cautiously optimistic. But again, if they try and shoehorn the stories leading up to and the first Avengers movie, we could get a mess because they're going to try and shoehorn in these moments that just won't work in a video game.
Exactly. Where something like Ultimate Alliance, even back in the X-Men Legends days, it feels a great deal like, well, I have all of these action figures.
Yeah.
I'm going to have all of them fight and come up with stories for them.
Yeah.
What are the stories? It doesn't matter. It keeps me playing. Whereas you don't get that option to pick and choose your team when you watch a movie.
Right.
You have different needs, is absolutely the thing.
Yeah. That's for sure. I mean, so there's one other franchise I think that when its movie comes out might actually also be a successful video game movie. And there's a reason for it. And I think it's the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise. And the reason I think that eventual movie will be a success for a myriad of reasons is because the way the story is delivered in those games in bits and pieces, and it's all lore and research and watching game theory if you're a layman and don't know where to find the info.
Yeah.
It's so handcrafted in this way that they just sprinkle the story that if they deliver the story in a similar way in a movie and they thread it together with these jump scares and these creepy characters, it could make for a really good movie and also allows for a lot of fleshing out and interpretation when you're working with a skeletal storyline from a game.
Yeah, and it also is designed in a very horror movie style.
Yes.
That has those slow uncoverings of lore, that has those moments of absolute gut-wrenching tension and terror that, I mean, horror films have been doing brilliantly, and not so brilliantly, but prolifically for decades.
Yeah.
And that's one where, yeah, the Five Nights at Freddy's series in general is very, it owes a lot to the tropes and stylings of horror films, but then allows for certain video game related tropes.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really worked for the Five Nights at Freddy's series is the fact that there is so much meta on it.
Yes.
The idea of the first game came out of nowhere, in a sense. And then the fact that there have been all of these sequels and continuations and building upon the lore, which is very horror movie style.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them come out very suddenly and oddly, and you have certain expectations, and then it paints the medium in order to pull gotcha moments, or it's like, well, this is a sequel? No, this is a prequel. This is actually the incident that happened 10 years ago. Oh, and it has a pacing that can be adapted well into film.
Yeah, I mean,
if they so choose.
Right. There's no guarantee it'll be good, but I think Scott Cawthon's been pretty brilliant in saying very little, interacting with the fans very sparsely, and interacting with the YouTube personalities who review the games very sparsely. So not only is there like a lore to the games, but there's also a lore to the designer behind them, which I think is very interesting.
Exactly.
And so at the end of the day, I think I'm optimistic for the future of video game movies if we take what we've learned from Detective Pikachu. I think, it doesn't hurt that they had Justice Smith and they had Ryan Reynolds. Like those are well-known actors who will, get people to go to the movies. But I think at the end of the day, the reason that it does so well is it was marketed to children. And I don't care if you're an adult and you like video games. Great. But movies like this are not meant for you. You can enjoy them, but they're meant for kids. And the fact that they marketed that way did it a real service, And I think the problem with, your Tomb Raider and your, Blood Rain and all these, which are adult properties.
Your Doom.
Right. They're all adult properties that are marketed towards adults. And I get that, but I think it's just less likely that you're going to draw people in. And I'm not saying dumb down those franchises, but I think if you're going to deliver an adult property, you have to take more steps and precautions to deliver on things outside of the game that will bring people in, like this kid's movie did for kids. It's why I'm cautiously optimistic about Illumination doing a Super Mario Brothers movie. Like, the Minion movies are what they are, and I liked the first couple of Despicable Me movies, but I think at the end of the day, if they treat it as a kids movie, they give us some stuff from the game, and they create a narrative that's interesting, it'll be a fun and funny movie. And at the end of the day, that's what you really need, is it to be entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to Detective Pikachu, one of the friends that came with us has never played a Pokemon game and knows very little about Pokemon. They still enjoyed the movie.
Yeah.
That's something to aspire to.
Right. And I think that's where video game movies should take something out of Marvel's handbook. Like, the reason Marvel has been successful is because when they started with Iron Man, they created this movie that for comic book fans would be a feast of references. But for everyone else, it was just a movie about a guy who creates a suit and wants to stop evil. And people could understand and get behind it. And like, while Ironmonger was huge for me because I remember Ironmonger from the comics, if people don't know who he is, they're like, oh, snap, Jeff Bridges is going to become the bad guy now. He's going to fuck some shit up. Like, you can still get behind it and enjoy it. It's why the first X-Men movie worked, even though it had its issues. Like, you're making these movies accessible to a larger audience. The reason I think the newer X-Men movies suffer, besides the script and some other stuff, is because they're trying too hard to link into the comics and not give us enough of the characters. Like, I love the X-Men, but they're not doing a movie about Wolverine and a movie about Cyclops and a movie about Storm and a movie about Professor X. And if they had, it might, like, that's what made Marvel successful, is that they took each character, spent time with them, and then brought them together. And I think Detective Pikachu was a brilliant way of doing that with the Pokemon world. Not necessarily with, even though we do spend most of the movie with one or two Pokemon, you introduce these characters who then you want to see again and maybe come back to this world and visit. And I think that's what's really key.
It does a good job of setting the pace.
Yeah. That said, I think that at the end of the day, as long as video games are regarded as easily transferable mediums, which they're not, we're going to get slogs and terrible movies.
Yep.
Because the problem is with certain execs at certain studios is they want to make quick cash. And I think at the end of the day, that's what some of those movies were intended to be, were cash grabs, and that's why they fail.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not just video games. It's any sort of well, this franchise is popular, this thing is popular, strike while the iron's hot and make some money.
Yeah.
And some will. And they probably also won't then be remembered as classics or anything. And if you're just trying to make some money, I guess you're not in the market for making classics.
I guess not. I mean, at the end of the day,
video games are guilty of that too.
Well, yes, there's shovelware everywhere.
Everywhere.
But but that said, I tend to be a more lenient movie watcher. I'm not a connoisseur of high art. I mean, I am, but if I see a dumb movie where the plot, I liked the Rampage movie. That's the other really good video game movie. You know why? Because there's no story in Rampage. So they made a story, and I got to watch a giant gorilla, a giant alligator, and a giant wolf destroy half of San Francisco.
Which is awesome.
That's all right. And also you get The Rock as the lead, who is incredibly charismatic in everything. And so that would be the only other good video game movie, because you don't even need to know about the video game to watch that. Like, if you just want to watch a cool-ass monster movie, it's a pretty good movie.
It's why I'm thinking of, game adaptations, and even outside video games. There's been a good game adaptation movie, Clue.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true.
You don't need to know much about the characters. They fill it all in there, and you just know that there's a murder. Who done it? From there, you can tell a very funny movie.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, to make good adaptations of anything, you have to start from a point of wanting to deliver, start at the ground and build your way up. You have this blueprint based on this other property, but don't just rely on that. Use it as a blueprint. And I think that's where a lot of these movies suffer and why the new Tomb Raider probably didn't do well, is they're like, well, this gritty reboot of Tomb Raider, the games, is doing well, so let's do a movie version of that and not come up with any original ideas.
Also, Tomb Raider as a franchise has had a lot of reboots, restarts, rejiggers, rewire, re-whatever, that there's also a thing of what version, what story, it's had its own issues of adaptation within its own series.
That is also true.
Let alone other mediums. So There's no guarantees on any of this. There is no guarantees.
Nope, but we just keep consuming, hoping to find the right stuff. And at the end of the day, if you still haven't seen it after sitting through all these spoilers, please go see Detective Pikachu, because it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and we'd love to hear what you think of Detective Pikachu when you have already seen it. Please tell us why you love it, why you don't love it, what's great, what's bad, which Pokemon you're happy to see, which Pokemon you really want to see.
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, we want to keep this conversation going. Also, if you have a favorite bad video game movie, let us know.
Yes, please.
The Super Mario Brothers movie has a special place in my heart just because, I've seen it so many times. It could be just Stockholm Syndrome at this point, but you know what? At the end of the day, I still enjoy John Leguizamo as Luigi because I enjoy John Leguizamo.
Oh, yeah, Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo are amazing actors.
So let us know what you think of video game movies in general, what you thought on Detective Pikachu, what your favorite video game movies are, and you can also, of course, find us on certainpov.com. Our Discord server is there if you want to join in the conversation there. Write us a review on iTunes or Facebook or anywhere you get your podcasts. It helps us to get featured and grow this conversation and interact with all of you fine folks.
Yes, this is, as always, a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming. We didn't even talk about Sonic the Hedgehog.